Hey folks, here today to start a series that I've been working on getting together. We're going to call it Woodscraft, Dirt Time, Dirt Cheap. And just want everybody to understand that this is going to be one of those small little things that it's probably going to be some repeats of what other people have done, but I think that I can show you a few more things. And the format that I'm going to put it into is how one thing that I cover relates to another thing, relates to another thing. And like I said, we're going to go through fire, cutting tools, knives, hand axes. Then we're going to hit a little on safety and first aid, because I think you need to know a little bit about that if you're going to be playing with fire and playing with knives. And then we'll go on to shelter and cordage, because I think that the shelter and cordage thing kind of goes hand in hand, because of the simple fact that we need cordage and to learn some basic knots. I'm not going to get real complicated into knots, but we need that to affect good shelter. You need cordage to affect a good shelter usually. Now you can start a shelter out of natural materials and get it done, there's no doubt. But I think it kind of relates, the cordage does, to the shelter thing. Then we'll go over some containers on the basics, on the cheap. Like I said, this is dirt time, dirt cheap. We'll even talk about some methods for cooking and such, that you won't really need a lot of containers, but you really do need some type of vessel to at least put some water in so that you can purify or something like that. But anyways, on to our series. This is part one. This will be fire. And like I said, this is going to be pretty much talking about cheap ways to affect fire without spending a bunch of money on really expensive ferro rods and, you know, supplements to start your fire with and all this type of stuff. You know, you can affect fire fairly easily just with a Bic lighter, you know. And the reason I say that is I always carry a Bic lighter like this. You know, it's a mini Bic, it's not real big. It actually works pretty well. I also carry a fire steel. Now this fire steel is basically a cheap one. I'll show you what it started out as. It started out as a, what they call Coglins or Coglins. I don't know if you can see that, read that. But that's what that fire steel started out as. I just popped the handle off of it. I always carry, well, we'll go on to some other fire starters. Now this is one that has a magnesium, and it's built all into one. Now these are a little on the more high end price wise, but it has magnesium built into it with a ferrocerium rod. Now I can show you in a kit, and I keep this kit in a waterproof container, and you can see this container. It's even got a rubber gasket that runs around the inside of there. But you can see in there, I've got a candle, I've got a lighter, I've got some char cloth, I've got matches, I've got dryer lint. This is another good idea for carrying matches. Just a little small Altoids tin. Got the striker in the box, then you got the matches inside. Keep that all in there. It keeps them from rolling around, rubbing into each other. Now, one of these lighters is a great lighter as far as cheap, but you have to refill it. But it strikes a very hot flame. You can barely even see that flame, but it's very hot. These can be picked up relatively cheap. You see them a lot of time in stores or gas stations right up at the checkout lane. Maybe $4 or $5, maybe even less. I'll show you my old standby. Now, this is a Zippo lighter. They're windproof, and it's not super windy, but of course it has to be refilled. And it says Zippo right on it. Can't beat that lighter for starting fires if you got something to start and make a fire extender. Now, what I'm talking about a fire extender is, and I'll show you some things here. You get into a fire extender, you've seen that kit, I have a candle. Now, this candle, once you get it lit, as long as you keep it from going out, that's going to extend your fire. There are other ways to make fire extenders. This is some fix-it wax. I make this wax myself. It's beeswax. It's got some essential oils in it, and it basically is about 99% beeswax with a little bit of essential oils in it, some antiseptic and stuff. But you see this jute twine? This is jute twine. We'll talk about that in our cordage section. But what I do is, if you'll rub that jute twine across the corner of this, and you see what I'm doing, I'm just holding it there and slicking it up. Now it's got a lot of wax worked into it. And you can work that wax into there. And this is what I'm talking about, a fire extender. Work that wax into there. Then you can take whatever your combustion tool is, your fire tool, and light that. And that's going to burn for a while. That wax kind of makes it like a candle wick. And so it'll stay burning. And see, you can even see it's kind of windy, but it's still burning. Now it went out. But you can work that wax into there, and that's just plain old jute. Nothing fancy. And it'll work. Those are your fire extenders. Now, I've got other fire extenders that I can show you. And one of them that actually is a great fire extender, it's pretty much waterproof once it's cured and dried, is fatwood. And you can see fatwood, this is processed. That's what it looks like when it's processed. This is fatwood in the raw. See that sap running out of there? See how yellow that is down inside there? That's fatwood. Some will be better than others. But when you see it and it's got that dark orangish hue to it, that's pretty decent fatwood. Like I said, this is unprocessed. This is processed. Now, if you're going to process this down further, this is where we talk about we're coming into the cutting tools, the knives, axes, hand axes, that type of stuff. But you'll want to take this and make little shavings with it. And those shavings, as you work that knife back, you make what they call a feather stick. And as you do that feather stick, the finer those feathers are, the quicker that's going to catch. And when that does catch, I'll show you what it looks like. It's just plain old Bic lighter. That stuff has a black sooty, you can see the black sooty smoke coming off of it. See how quick that caught? Now it will go out in a flame, but what I'm saying is that right there is what we're talking about, fatwood. And this stuff will start even when it's wet, once it's cured. And when I mean cured, I mean once it's been dried out. Now there are other ways to affect fire. Of course, we talked about the matches. Now here's another example of a match case. It's probably not the most reliable thing in the world, but it screws up into the lid, and when you unscrew it all the way, this is one I carried in Boy Scouts, but when you unscrew it all the way, it swings out. And then I've got the Ohio Blue Tips, or the Blue Tip matches, which are strike anywheres. Those are what I recommend, possibly coated in some clear fingernail polish, something like that, or dip them in wax to waterproof them. Or you can just go and buy waterproof matches. Anyways, what I'm trying to get to is there's a lot of things that you can use to get fire. And I'll show you some different tinders that we use pretty commonly, and maybe some that's not so common. But you need to think about these things and practice them so that you can get an idea of how well they're going to work in your situation. You know, if you live in a wet area, you know, or a very humid area, you know, we find it very humid here in Indiana at times. And when it's humid like this, I'll tell you what, it's tough to get a fire going unless you got some good tinder and you do your fire prep. And what I'm talking about fire prep is what I just showed you with the curls on the stick, but you need something that'll fill a bill hat full of those type of curls. And I'm saying, you know, take your time with your fire prep. Now, you see how easy fat wood starts, and fat wood starts great. It's a nice thing to have, but it's not always easily accessible. Anymore though, when you see these sticks, just like this one right here, you can actually go to your local big box store, and usually in the grilling section, or if they have like a heater section or a fireplace section, you can buy a whole box full of fat wood. And all it is a real heavy resin pine. And what I mean by heavy resin is all the pine sap is settled into like one part of the tree when it's harvested, and man does it burn. I mean, it is phenomenal. Anyways, now I'm going to get into just a little bit more of a primitive fire start, and I'll show you what a ferrocerium rod does, and you can kind of take that as what it's supposed to look like. Now you'll notice that when I use my ferrocerium rod, it doesn't have a bunch of ridges on it, okay? If you use it incorrectly, it will have ridges, but you can see that I'm going to hold my spine of my knife basically at about a 90-degree angle. I've got the spine of my knife at almost a 90-degree angle. But the best way to do this, and I'm going to show you this just kind of down and dirty real quick, is to hold your ferrocerium rod at an angle like this and get it stable. And you'll get sparks. The more sparks you get, the quicker it's going to burn. Now I'm going to show you this with a bigger ferrocerium rod so that you can actually witness it a little closer. Now this one's a lot bigger. It's about a ½ inch in diameter. It's about 5 inches long. The big thing with the ferrocerium rod is you have to get the coating rubbed off of it. Once you get the coating rubbed off, you see them sparks? And see, I almost had a coal going right here on this piece of paper. Now you see kind of what a ferrocerium rod does. There's a lot of different sizes of these. This magnesium rod, now what you do with it is you'll actually scrapings off the magnesium part, then you use the ferro part to ignite the magnesium part. Those burn, magnesium shavings will burn at 3,000 degrees or real close to it. But it actually makes something if you have something that's wet and you scrape some of this off onto there and then hit it with this, it will ignite. It will burn this magnesium. Now, like I said, this is a little higher end. I'll show you one that's a little lower end. Now this one is just a cheapie from Harbor Freight. I'm pretty sure everybody's ever heard of Harbor Freight knows that they don't make real good quality stuff. But it's got the magnesium, it's got the ferrocerium rod built right into it, right there. Now, you can definitely make some shavings with this. We'll kind of show you here. Again, I'm using the spine of my knife, the back side. And this is one thing you want to do. When you're doing this, find something to put them in when you're making the scrapings. See, I'm just running them right into this piece of paper. Once you get that little pile of shavings in there, and you can see what they look like. They're kind of silvery looking. Then you can take your ferro rod that's attached. Now this thing is a saw piece of like a hacksaw. It's got little teeth on it. I guess they intend for you to use that. And it does actually throw a decent spark off of the ferro rod when you hit it. I'll show you that. I don't know if I've got this one cleaned up yet. Yeah, it's cleaned up. As you can see, I want to get that down there close. See how that burns? Right now. I mean, it's hot. Very hot. But I just wanted to show you that. That's how magnesium, and like I said, this is a cheapie. This is just a Harbor Freight job. I think it costs $2. But it's a way that you can affect fire. Now that we've gone through a few methods of different ways to start a fire and extend a fire, we'll talk a little bit about some tinder. Now we're going to talk about some tinder. And when I talk about tinder, I'm talking about something that will get your fire actually going into a flame. You can actually take like the piece of fat wood and create enough curls, and if it's good and dry and well cured and everything's real fine, then you can actually create fire just with a ferro rod with that. But there are other ways to do the same thing. Now, one of the most common ones is petroleum jelly or Vaseline on cotton balls. I'm not going to talk about that. That's been done a million times. What I am going to talk about is common dryer lint right here. That is very common dryer lint. Just pulled it out of my dryer the other day. This stuff will take a spark pretty decent, and it'll definitely take a flame right away. Now I'll show you, see if it'll take a spark. We'll try it right here, just a little piece of it with the ferro rod. There it goes. It's on fire. That's a pretty good little fire burning type idea. I would try and get it when you do a load of blue jeans or something like that, because it will actually take off a little quicker with the cotton content of most blue jeans. Have a lot of cotton in them. So I'm just trying to, and I'm messing with it pretty bad to get it to go out. You know, it's not something that, it'll definitely keep you a fire going. You know, that's something I carry in all of my kits. Somewhere or another is a little wad of dryer lint. And the reason I carry that dryer lint is just for the simple fact that I know I can get fire and possibly get something else started. Now, if it's really damp out, the weather's bad, you know, that's where your fire prep is going to come in. That's where making the shavings, like I showed you, gathering up smalls. And when I'm talking about smalls, I'm talking about pencil lead size small twigs, not off the ground. You want to get these preferably on maybe a branch that came down out of a tree, or a dead standing tree, something like that, that you can get these smalls the size of a pencil lead and work your way up to the size of a pencil, and then work your way up to about the size of a finger, a small finger, you know, like a kid's finger, and then work your way up to about thumb size stuff, and you get your fire right, you know, but you don't want to add too fast too much. It'll smother your fire. You've seen my other videos of me making fire, so I'm not going to talk too specifically about fire itself as far as, you know, how the build goes. That's a whole nother thing. What I'm talking about is trying to get you to practice making fire with some of the techniques that I'm showing you, some of the tools that I'm showing you, and some of the materials I'm showing you. Okay, on to some of the other materials that we can affect fire from. I have a piece of, this is kerosene lamp wick. Now you see the end of that, it looks like it's been burnt. I did that purposely because that way, that end of that will take a spark a little quicker once it's been burned off. Or if you want to light it with a lighter, it'll light a lot quicker. Now something you can do, you see how that's got a little coal on the end of it? If you don't put anything on this, you can see that coal burning. And I'll show you when I blow on it. It's almost like a type of charcoal. That's another good fire extender. Right there. You can see how that's holding the coal when it's dry. Now if you soak this with wax, then it becomes like a candle wick. Once you light the end of it, it makes a great fire extender, just like a candle would, but it's just a little lighter, a little smaller, less bulky. Okay, let's get into some of our tinders that we can use. Now here's a tinder that is great for building what they call a bird's nest. And when I talk about a bird's nest, you can see kind of how that resembles a bird's nest. And what you would do is once you get this, now this is cedar. This is cedar strips. Like if you strip the bark on a cedar tree, this is what you will get. It's very fine, very soft, and very, very nice to start a fire with. So if you had your piece of dryer lint or whatever it may be, you get that down in there, get your fire going, wrap this up around it, got fire almost instantly. Then you start putting your smalls on, your curls that you would cut on a feather stick like I showed you, something like that. Cedar bark is a great thing if you can find a cedar tree. And you know, those grow in a lot of people's front yards, believe it or not. People plant these. They're not just out in the wild any place, sometimes. Now here's something that's a little more not common to my area, and that would be birch bark. Birch bark is fantastic for a tinder. I will peel a piece of this off there and you'll see what I'm meaning. And it's, they call it like a paper birch. This stuff will burn pretty much when it's wet too. Very thin. And I'll show you what it does. Now it will take a spark from a ferrocerium rod if it's really good and hot. You know, a good ferrocerium rod. But we'll light this. And you can see that black smoke. See that black smoke? Stuff burns and burns and burns. Really good. It's about like fat wood. Problem is, we don't have that in Indiana as a common thing. Actually, I was in a thrift store. And see, this is what I'm talking about, the dirt time, dirt cheap, okay? I went into the thrift store and found this. This was actually in the section where they had a bunch of like wood candle holders and wood stuff, everything. This was a candle holder. I think I paid $2 for it, and originally it was this big around and about this tall. Well, that's how tall it was, because that's part of the candle holder. This is a piece of that birch. So, you know, I salvaged it. I salvaged all the bark. It's great for starting fires. Salvage the wood, makes a good starter. You can take that down, split that into little tiny pieces, like that. And you're going to have a really great fire in a short amount of time. Now, something a lot of people talk about is other fire extenders, but we usually don't talk about it in the sort of sense that we think of them as fire extenders. We think of them as hygiene products, and I'm going to show you a couple of them right here. There's a wet wipe, and right here, some good old teepee. That's a great tinder. Great tinder. You get that started with your ferrocerium rod, you get that started with a lighter, with a match, start putting your smalls, your curls on that, and it doesn't take a lot. But I always carry this out in the woods with me. I don't know about you, but I like to have a little bit of teepee. Same thing with these wet wipes. Now, a lot of these wet wipes are synthetic of some type. Some of them have alcohol in them, some of them don't. But if you can get that started, and I would check with them and try them before I bring them out in the woods with me, and just on a whim try it. But take one out of the package at home and put a lighter to it. See if it works. Some of these are great for basically like a tinder to get your fire started. Now, one other thing that people don't think a lot about, and I've got it here in this thing, and that, well, I've got two other things here, but that one of them is tape. You see that tape? That's black electrician's tape. This tape has a tendency to burn pretty doggone good. Well, I'll show you what I mean. Just common electrician's tape, okay? See how black that smoke is? I blew it out. It lights a little harder than some things. But that stuff, great fire extender, great tinder. That will get some wet wood going if you need it. Now, one of the best things, and especially if you're in a wet situation and you have a lighter or some matches, and I carry this is kind of like a little sewing kit, but what I've got here, everybody calls them Ranger bands, whatever they are. It's a piece of inner tube out of a bicycle. See how stretchy it is? You can cut slivers of that, and I'll show you a sliver of it. Now, you cut a sliver off, and I'm talking a sliver. That ain't very much. That's pretty doggone small. There's my mini Bic, so you can see how small it is. This stuff, once you get it lit, it takes a minute to get it going. Once it's going, you can start fire even if the wood is wet. That's what I'm talking about. There's different ways to get fire, and all these ways can be practiced at home relatively cheap. You know, like I said, the inner tube, the dryer lint, even skulking around in some secondhand stores, you're going to find something. If you're thinking in that sort of sense of, hey, what can I use this for? You'll find something, you know, just like a wet wipe. If it's wet wipes that work and have a little bit of alcohol in them, the synthetic in them, they will work as a tinder to start fire. Now, some of these things are not going to take a spark off of a ferrocerium rod and start. You're going to have actual flame from a match or a lighter. But as you can see, this entire table, most of this stuff, with the exception of a few things, I can pull out of a pack or a day kit at any given time. And that's the reason that I think that fire is one of the things that everybody needs to practice is because if you're on a day kit or an overnighter or whatever it may be, you need to be able to affect fire to cook your food, to disinfect your water, to stay warm, anything that you can think of that has to do with fire. But yeah, when you're out and about, look for these simple things. You know, they're not expensive, they're not costly. I'm trying to stick to the whole theory of, you know, dirt time, dirt cheap. You know, like I said, some of my stuff actually came from, you know, consignment stores, thrift stores, flea markets, garage sales. You just got to have the right idea about when you're looking at things, what can I use that for? And you'll see that as we go on in this series, that I'll talk about a lot of things that I picked up at flea markets, thrift stores, garage sales, auctions, different things like that. You know, I'm all about being thrifty, and I think that being thrifty in the sort of sense of not going, you know, low quality, it's just, you know, don't spend a bunch of money so that you can have money to spend on something that is a little more important, you know. And like I said, all this stuff here that I have today that I've showed you, I think you need to practice this and practice getting a fire going. There's all kinds of videos out there, reading material, that type of stuff that will show you different fire lays. And what I'm talking about fire lay is, you know, like either doing a one stick fire, a twig fire, whatever it may be. So, you know, you do your research on that. I just want to give you some ideas on the fire part, because I think that's the most important thing when you're going out to camp. You know, you need that fire to disinfect your water. You need that fire to cook with, and sometimes you need that fire to keep warm. So, you know, you should be able to affect fire pretty much at any given time. I'm not going to get into any of the fire drill, flint and steel. You've seen me do some of that on my video as far as flint and steel, char cloth, that type of stuff. I'm just talking about getting fire. Regardless of how you do it, just make sure that you can get a fire and keep it sustained to where it'll actually sustain you. So that's about the end of this video. I just wanted to give you some basics on the cheap of what you can do with very little, and some of the common things, maybe not so common things. You know, like when I showed you the electrical tape is basically about the same as duct tape, Gorilla tape, anything like that. It'll do the same thing. The adhesive is what burns. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize that. But it's a good thing to keep in the back of your head. It doesn't take long to wrap something up with a little bit of duct tape or some type of tape. And then if you need it to actually make your fire tinder with, that tape will work, you know. Anyways, I'm going to end the video now. The next segment that we'll probably do will be knives and cutting tools such as hand axes. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.